War is often measured in years. We speak of the 7 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, or the endless campaigns of antiquity. We look at dates in history books, 52 BC, 1812 AD, and we see the span of time as a flat line. But for the men on the ground, and more importantly for the empires that foot the bill, war is not measured in years. It is measured in days, one single day. From the moment the sun rises over the encampment to the moment it sets over the dead, the meter is running. Every soldier must eat, every horse must be fed, every weapon must be maintained, and every hour costs a fortune in gold, silver, and blood. Today, we are going to audit the books of history as two greatest military CEOs, Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte. We are going to calculate the price of ambition. We will weigh the Roman denarius against the French franc, the iron pilum against the lead musket ball. We are going to look past the strategy and the glory to find the receipt. This is the cost of one day of war. To understand the cost, we must first understand the currency. For Julius Caesar, operating in the 1st century BC, the currency was the denarius, a small silver coin, roughly a day's wage for a skilled laborer in Rome. It was the dollar of the ancient world. For Napoleon, in the early 19th century, it was the franc, born of the Revolution, stable but scarce. But the real currency for both men was logistics. Amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics. Let's open the ledger on the Roman legions first. Imagine it is 58 BC. We are in Gaul. Julius Caesar has under his command 4 legions, roughly 20,000 men, plus thousands of auxiliaries. Let's look at the fixed costs of a single day in this camp. A Roman legionary does not fight for free. For centuries, the pay was meager, but Caesar knows that loyalty is purchased. He effectively doubles the pay of his troops to 225 denarii a year. That sounds simple enough. But look closer at the coin. The genius and the scam of the Roman military economy is the deduction system. On paper, the daily wage of a legionary is about 0.6 denarii. It is less than a laborer earns in the city of Rome. But the state doesn't just hand that over. From that daily wage, the legionary must pay for his own food. He pays for his boots. He pays for his bedding, and in some cases, the replacement of his armor. The daily cost to the Roman state for wages is theoretically high. For 4 legions, we are looking at roughly 12,000 denarii per day just in payroll. That is the equivalent of paying 12,000 construction workers every single morning. But because of the deductions, the actual cash leaving Caesar's war chest on a daily basis is lower. He holds the money, he promises the payout at the end of the campaign. This is the first lesson in the cost of war: deferred payment. Caesar is fighting on credit. He is borrowing the lives of his men against the future wealth he hopes to conquer. However, while you can defer payment, you cannot defer hunger. A Roman soldier eats grain, wheat, about 1 kilogram, roughly 2 pounds per day. He grinds it himself with a portable hand mill. He bakes it into panis militaris, a dense, hard bread. For 20,000 men, that is 20 metric tons of wheat, every single day. In 58 BC, you cannot just wire money to a supplier. That wheat has to be moved. A mule can carry about 100 kilograms. To move one day's food for the army, you need 200 mules just for the wheat. But the mules also need to eat, and the men driving the mules need to eat. The logistical tail of a Roman army was often larger than the army itself. For every combatant, there was a non-combatant: servants, slaves, muleteers. The daily burn of a legion wasn't just gold, it was calories. If the supply line from the Roman province failed for 3 days, the army starved. The cost of one day of war, therefore, was the cost of moving 20 tons of grain 20 miles through hostile territory. Now, let's fast forward 1,800 years. It is 1805, the Grande Armée. Napoleon Bonaparte has assembled the greatest fighting force Europe has ever seen. The scale has exploded. Caesar commanded 20,000 to 50,000 men. Napoleon commands 200,000. The daily check just got a lot bigger. A French private received about 30 to 35 centimes a day. In terms of purchasing power, it was pitiful. Perhaps the price of a loaf of bread and a drink in a Paris tavern. But multiply that by 200,000. Napoleon is spending 70,000 francs every morning just on soldier wages. But Napoleon changed the equation of the cost. Caesar relied on supply lines, long trains of mules bringing grain from friendly territory. Napoleon looked at the cost of wagons, the cost of slow movement, and he slashed it. He introduced the corps d'armée system. He divided his army into self-sufficient corps of 20,000 to 30,000 men. And he gave them a chilling order: live off the land. To live off the land sounds romantic. It is not. It means theft, organized industrial scale theft. The cost of the war was shifted from the French treasury to the Austrian peasant. A French corps arriving in a village would demand 10,000 rations of bread, 50 head of cattle, and 2,000 bottles of wine. If the village couldn't pay, the village burned. This is the second lesson in the cost of war. externalizing the expense. Caesar paid for his grain mostly, Napoleon took his. On a daily basis, the cost of the Grande Armée might have been 500,000 francs in consumed resources, but Napoleon only paid a fraction of that. The rest was paid by the farmers of Bavaria, the shopkeepers of Vienna, and the burghers of Berlin. We have talked about food and wages, but the true cost of one day of war is not found in the mess tent. It is found on the battlefield. Let's compare two specific days, 2 days where the bill came due. August 9th, 48 BC, the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar versus Pompey. The cost of this day is astronomical, but not in ammunition. A Roman battle is a collision of human capital. A legionary takes years to train. He is a high investment asset. His armor, his gladius, his training, this represents thousands of denarii of state investment. At Pharsalus, Caesar has about 22,000 men. Pompey has 45,000. The battle lasts perhaps 4 hours. In those 4 hours, 15,000 of Pompey's men are killed or surrender. Caesar claims to lose only 200 men, a likely propaganda number. But let S assume the real number is closer to 1,200 dead and wounded. Think about the medical cost. A plume through the shoulder. A gladius slashed to the thigh. They have no anesthesia. They have wine and they have saws. The cost of the battle continues for weeks in the hospital tents. A man who cannot march is a man who costs money but gives nothing. We leave them or we retire them. A dead soldier costs the state a burial. A crippled soldier costs the state a pension, if he's lucky. The equipment lost in one day at Pharsalus is staggering. Thousands of javelins, the famous pila, are thrown. These are single-use weapons designed to bend on impact so they can't be thrown back. Iron and wood, crafted by smiths in Italy, hurled away in seconds. But the greatest cost is the opportunity cost. These are Roman citizens killing Roman citizens. The economic engine of the Republic is slaughtering its own workforce. The GDP of Rome took a hit that day that took a generation to recover. Now, let's look at September 7th, 1812, the Battle of Borodino, Napoleon versus the Russian Empire. If Pharsalus was expensive, Borodino is a bankruptcy filing. In one single day, from dawn until dusk, the French and Russian armies fire 70,000 cannonballs. They fire 1.4 million musket cartridges. Let's price that out. A cannonball is solid iron, 12 pounds, 70,000 of them. That is nearly 400 tons of processed iron fired into the mud in one day. The industrial output of a mid-sized city expended in 10 hours. Gunpowder, sulfur, charcoal, saltpeter. Hard to source, dangerous to mix. Tons of it, burned away in smoke. And the human cost? 70,000 casualties combined. 45,000 Russians, 30,000 French. That is roughly one casualty every second of the battle. The cost to replace a French soldier in 1812 was getting higher. The veterans of 1805 were gone. These were conscripts, young boys, Marie-Louises, they called them. To replace the 30,000 men lost at Borodino requires a massive state apparatus of conscription, training, and uniforms and muskets. The financial cost of Borodino. The financial cost of Borodino in 1812, francs, is estimated to be in the millions. But the strategic cost was infinite. Napoleon bought the battlefield, but he didn't buy the victory. He paid the highest price imaginable for a piece of ground that gave him nothing. This brings us to the hidden costs, the costs that don't show up on the daily ledger. For Caesar, the hidden cost was political capital. Every day the war continued, his debt grew. Caesar was personally bankrupt when he went to Gaul. He owed millions of sesterces to creditors in Rome. The cost of one day of peace was actually higher for Caesar than the cost of war. If he stopped fighting, he would be recalled, prosecuted, and ruined. War was his revenue stream. When he sacked a Gallic city, the plunder, gold, silver, and slaves, paid for the army for another year. Caesar's war was a Ponzi scheme. As long as he kept conquering, the money kept flowing. The day he stopped, the bill would come due. Consider the slaves. In one day, after the siege of Alesia, Caesar acquired 40,000 captives. To us, this is a human tragedy. To the Roman economy, this was a massive injection of liquidity. A healthy male slave could be sold for 500 denarii. 40,000 slaves times 500 denarii equals 20 million denarii. In one day, Caesar generated enough revenue to pay his 4 legions for 10 years. For Caesar, the cost of war was negative. War made a profit. Napoleon was different. By 1812, the wars were no longer profitable. In the early days, in Italy and Egypt, Napoleon, like Caesar, sent treasure back to Paris. He balanced the French budget with Austrian gold, but as the wars dragged on, the law of diminishing returns set in. Spain, Russia. These were poor countries compared to the rich plains of Italy. There was less gold to steal. The cost of one day of war in Spain was bleeding France dry, not just money, horses. We forget the horses. In the Russian campaign, Napoleon lost 200,000 horses. A cavalry horse costs 10 times what a soldier costs. It eats 10 times as much. When the horses died in the winter of 1812, the Grande Armée ceased to be a mobile force. You cannot buy a trained cavalry horse in the middle of the Russian steppe. The loss of that capital was total. Napoleon's economy was based on victory. He needed short, sharp wars. A coup of war was only sustainable if it led to a peace treaty and an indemnity. When the war turned into a slog, when the days turned into years, the franc collapsed. The cost of maintaining 500,000 men in the field without plunder is a weight no state in the 19th century could bear. Let's dig deeper into the receipts of these two war machines. We mentioned the grain and the bread, but what about the luxury of war? What about the morale? For Caesar's legionaries, the daily cost included sour wine or pasca. It sounds trivial, vinegar and water, but it was the antibacterial agent of the ancient world. It kept the army from dying of dysentery. The cost of shipping wine amphorae from Italy to Gaul was staggering. Archaeologists find millions of broken amphorae shards in military camps. This represents a state-sponsored supply chain of specialized ceramics, shipping, and river barges just to keep the water drinkable. If the pasca stopped, the legion stopped. For Napoleon, the morale cost was tobacco and shoes. During the 1805 campaign, the French army marched so fast, 30 kilometers a day, that the soldiers' shoes disintegrated. Napoleon had to issue emergency funds to buy thousands of pairs of boots from local towns. A barefoot army is a free army, but a useless one. The cost of one day of war suddenly included the price of leather in Vienna. When the price of leather spiked because of the army's demand, the local economy crashed, causing riots. This is the inflationary cost of war. When an army like Napoleon's enters a region, the price of everything, bread, meat, leather, cloth, triples overnight. The cost is borne by the single mother in the village who can no longer afford to feed her children because the Grande Armée has bought or stolen all the grain. And let's look at the cost of information. Caesar spent a fortune on spies and scouts. He sent writers back to Rome every day with letters. These letters were his propaganda. The Gallic commentaries were essentially expensive press releases designed to keep his funding secure in the Senate. The cost of one day of war included the cost of the couriers riding horses into the ground to get the news to Rome before his political enemies could spin it. Napoleon had the Chappé semaphore system, a precursor to the telegraph, mechanical arms on towers that could signal messages across France in hours. Operating this network cost thousands of francs a day. But it allowed Napoleon to move armies faster than his enemies. He bought time with money, and in war, time is the most expensive commodity of all. Let's not forget the cost of leadership. Both Caesar and Napoleon surrounded themselves with a staff of experts, engineers, scribes, cartographers. In Caesar's camp, the presence of engineering genius was a daily line item. Look at the siege of Alesia. In a matter of weeks, Caesar's men built two massive walls, one to keep the Gauls in and one to keep reinforcements out. The amount of timber required for that construction is mind-boggling. They deforested the entire region. Every tree cut down, every stake sharpened, every trench dug represents man-hours. In a civilian economy, those men would be farming, building houses, or trading. In war, their labor is sunk into a structure designed to be temporary. The circumvallation of Alesia was a marvel of engineering, but it produced no economic value. It was a sunk cost, justified only by the capture of Vercingetorix. The daily labor cost of those weeks at Alesia would rival the construction of a major aqueduct or temple in Rome. But unlike an aqueduct, which pays dividends for centuries, the walls of Alesia were abandoned the moment the battle ended. Napoleon's staff was equally expensive, but more bureaucratic. The French army ran on paper. The État Major processed thousands of reports daily. The cost of ink, paper, and clerks was a significant part of the daily budget. Napoleon needed to know where every biscuit and every bullet was. This administrative overhead is the hidden bureaucracy of war. A single day of confusion could cost a battle, so the price of clarity was paid in the wages of thousands of adjutants and aides de camp. We must also consider the cost of wear and tear, not just on shoes or horses, but on the metal itself. A musket in 1812 had a shelf life. The firing mechanism, the flintlock, would wear down. Flints had to be replaced constantly. A good flint might last 20 shots. In a large battle, the army would consume hundreds of thousands of flints. These are stones, yes, but specific stones, mined, shaped, and transported. If the supply of flints failed, the muskets became clubs. Caesar's legions faced a similar issue with their pila. The soft iron shanks were designed to bend, but that meant they were often ruined after one throw. While they could sometimes be retrieved and repaired by the campsmiths, the constant need for iron ore and charcoal to fuel the mobile forges was a daily logistical burden. The smoke of the smithy was as much a part of the Roman camp as the smell of the latrines. Let's do a final accounting. If we adjust for inflation, a tricky business, but let's try. Who spent more on a single day? A Roman legion of 5,000 men cost the state roughly 50,000 to 100,000 US dollars per day in modern purchasing power equivalent. This covers wages, food, and equipment maintenance. Caesar had 10 legions at his peak. That brings his total daily burn to around 1 million US dollars. Napoleon's Grande Armée of 500,000 men was a different beast entirely. Wages, massive artillery trains, hundreds of thousands of horses, and complex supply wagons. The daily cost of the Grande Armée in 1812 is estimated to be the equivalent of 15 million to 20 million US dollars per day. Napoleon's war was 20 times more expensive. Why? Technology. Gunpowder is expensive. Cannons are expensive. The scale of logistics required to feed 500,000 men is exponentially higher than feeding 50,000. Caesar could march his men 20 miles a day, and they could carry their own food in their sarcina, their marching packs. Napoleon's army was a beast that required a tail of thousands of wagons. But there is one cost that is exactly the same for both: the cost to the soldier. Whether holding a gladius or a musket, the soldier pays the ultimate tax. He pays with his youth, he pays with his health, and often he pays with his life. In Caesar's time, a soldier served for 20 years. If he survived, he got a plot of land. That was the contract. A life for a farm. In Napoleon's time, a conscript served until victory or death. Most found death. We have the letters from these men. A French soldier in 1812 writes, "I have not eaten bread in 3 weeks. We eat the horses that die in the night." A Roman soldier in 52 BC might write home on a scrap of bark, "My sandals are worn through. The snow bites my toes. The general says we march for Rome," and the cost of 1 day of war. For Caesar, it was an investment, a gamble that paid off in the destruction of the Republic and the birth of an empire. He spent the blood and treasure of Rome to buy himself a throne. For Napoleon, it was a gamble that eventually broke the bank. The days added up, the costs compounded. And in the end, on a rainy day at Waterloo, the credit limit was reached. When we read the history books, we see the glory, we see the lines on the map change, we see the statues and the triumphal arches. But if you listen closely, you can hear the coins dropping. You can hear the grain grinding in the hand mills. You can hear the silence of the 40,000 men who didn't wake up the next morning. That is the true bill, and it is a bill that humanity is still paying, 1 day at a time. The methods change, the currency changes. We move from silver to paper to digital transactions. We move from swords to muskets to drones. But the fundamental economics of war remain the same. It is a consumption engine, a fire that must be fed. And the